Well, first of all, thank you all for coming, and we've had a wonderful trip here to the region over the last 6 days. We arrived on Sunday evening and drove to Amman, Jordan, and we had some phenomenal meetings over there, which reaffirmed the strong bind between the United States and our allies in Jordan. We saw His Majesty King Abdullah, had a fantastic meeting with the foreign minister as well, Judah, and we talked about the issues that are going on throughout the region, but in particular starting in Jordan, where the king, to his credit, has taken action in constitutional reform. In light of all the things that are going around the region, it certainly is wise, certainly in hindsight, to see what he has done and continues to do. Now it's a work in progress, and no one pretends that what has happened in Jordan with their political process is a completed work. But it's an important work, and one that the king deserves credit for having begun. We certainly talked about the issues that are going on in Syria. And what's most apparent from the Syrian conflict is that there are two conflicts going on at the same time. There's the one conflict to get rid of Assad, who we believe it's inevitable that he will fall, the sooner the better. And a second conflict, unfortunately, between those that are working to get rid of Assad and the different interests that they have for the long term of that country and for the region. And that's why I've been a forceful advocate for U.S. engagement and U.S. involvement in that conflict. First and foremost, because Assad is an assassin. He's bad for his people. He's bad for the region. He's a sponsor of terrorism. He's allowed Syria to be used as a staging ground and a waypoint for terrorists for over 2 decades. And so as a result, we think this is a positive development. But we also think it's important for us to be involved in the Syrian conflict because we want to ensure that responsible actors are the ones who ultimately win that conflict and have control of the Syrian territory after the conflict. So we hope to go back to Washington and have further discussions with our colleagues and with the White House, with the administration, about what more we can do to become engaged in that conflict, working together with our allies to bring it to not just a conclusion, but also set the stage for a better future for the Syrian people and ultimately for the region. I would add, by the way, that Jordan has done a phenomenal job of dealing with the impact of over 350,000 refugees, maybe more, at a rate of 4,000 a day that are coming into Jordan. They need more help. Certainly it's placing a strain on what's already a tested economy in Jordan. And one of the things we talked with the king about, and with the foreign minister, is the need for more economic development to grow the Jordanian economy. But certainly this refugee situation is placing a strain on them, and they need the cooperation from the international community and from other Arab nations who have made pledges to do so, and the United Nations and the U.S. funding mechanisms are involved in that, as well as independently that we've been able to do to help the nation of Jordan deal with the costs of what is now close to 400,000 refugees and growing every single day as a result of the Syrian conflict. After spending a couple of days in Jordan, we arrived here in Jerusalem and had meetings with a number of leaders of of Israel. Obviously, as you saw yesterday, we had the honor of meeting with the Prime Minister and reaffirmed, as well as with the President, and we reaffirmed the strong bond between the United States and Israel. One of the things I'm proudest about is that it's a bipartisan commitment. That in a time when there's so much conflict and debate in Washington about so many things, one thing that's not open to debate, one thing that there is a strong consensus, perhaps more than any other issue we face in foreign policy, in fact, without a doubt, more than any other issue we face in foreign policy, is this bipartisan commitment to the relationship with Israel, one of our most important relationships in the world, and one that I'm proud to say will be furthered by the President's visit here next month. Everywhere we went, we heard excitement about that. And the fact the President, together with the Secretary Kerry, are coming at such an important time for the region and the world. Clearly, our view of Israel and our policy towards Israel begins and ends with Israel's security. And that's the issue through which I view every other issue with regards to the region. No nation in the world has suffered more in recent times than the Israeli people have from war and violence in terms of its neighbors. And so we are, as much as any people on earth, the Israeli people are committed to peace, and we heard that everywhere we went. We certainly face some significant challenges. First and foremost is the Iranian threat, which, by the way, is not an Israeli problem. It is a problem for the world. And one of the things that we wanted to make clear is that there is strong bipartisan commitment in the United States for the idea that a nuclear Iran is not something that we can live with. It's not something that's acceptable. It's not something that we can contain. And it's something the President has made clear in his statements. It's something that there's strong congressional support for. Our preference, of course, is that Iran reaches that conclusion that it doesn't want a nuclear program, weapons program, on its own. Obviously, that's not the direction they're headed, and that's why these sanctions are so important. We hope those sanctions can be strengthened on an international level. We continue to explore ways to strengthen them domestically from a U.S. perspective. But ultimately, we also have to be prepared for the reality that while we hope sanctions will work, we pray sanctions will work, we need to be prepared for the possibility that sanctions may not work. And I won't go any further other than to say that a nuclear Iran is not something that is acceptable. And I think it's important to make clear that on that principle there is strong bipartisan support in the United States as well. Beyond the issue, of course, of the Iranian threat, there is the Syrian reality and the fact that in Syria today are extraordinary weapons, not just chemical weapons and nerve agents and biological agents, but other weapons, weapons that will allow them to strike seacraft, weapons that are anti-aircraft weaponry, unprecedented weapons that many other nations in the world do not have. And there is serious risk if they are somehow extremist elements get control of these weapons, if somehow these weapons get into the hands of arms dealers that are able to distribute them. We've seen what's happened with the Libyan conflict. Imagine that times 10. And that's something that we're keeping a very close eye on. It's something that we're going to have very clear ideas about, and how we will prevent these weapons from being spread in the region or falling into the hands of irresponsible and violent actors. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. And last but not least, of course, with regards to Israeli security, is the peace process and the issue of the Palestinian question that continues to face Israel in the region. And certainly there's, and I echo what I found to be the widespread desire here in Israel for a solution that involves two countries for two people living side by side peacefully. That's a strong desire from every single person we met with in the Israeli government. But central to that question is Israel's security. That ultimate goal of two nations for two people living side by side peacefully is impossible if Israel does not have security. And so that issue is always viewed through that lens and through that prism. And that's what we reaffirm here. Now, we are hopeful that the conditions can be laid for that to ultimately happen, that progress can be made on things like economic development, on strengthening the security agencies in the West Bank, on making progress on all of these fundamental issues, because they begin to lay the groundwork and create the conditions for that ultimate goal at some point in the future, where both sides can sit down without conditions and negotiate that settlement. But that will obviously runs its own course and its own pace, and it's all centered on Israel's security, which is critical and important, and something there's strong bipartisan support for in the United States. Last but not least, let me say that the Israeli-U.S. relationship is not simply built on military ties or security ties or diplomatic ties. They're also built on strong economic ties. One of the great things we were able to do in our visits here is meet with a number of startup entrepreneurs, men and women who have taken these extraordinary ideas that they've developed here in Israel, and in partnership with American companies, are being able to mass produce these products and bring them to scale. And we've seen the benefits to our economy in the United States, certainly here to Israel, but also the contribution that can potentially make to the developed world. You look at what Israel's doing with desalination and water technology. That's going to have extraordinary applications in the developing world. So Israel has a lot to contribute economically, and I think sometimes we lose focus on the economic ties between Israel and the United States. They are critically important. They are strong. They are vital. They are vibrant. And we need to continue to invest in those and incentivize those. And it's one of the things I was most impressed with our visit here, is that the idea that Israel is a startup nation is real, and that we're so excited about what that's meant in the past and what it can mean in the future. And that's something we'll take back home with us and emphasize to our colleagues. So those are our general impressions of this visit. We'll have more to say in terms of specific public policy when I return to Washington and have a little bit more time to reflect on what we've learned and the conversations that we've had. But I can tell you it's been an incredibly insightful visit. We've learned a lot that we think will inform our foreign policy positions. And we're excited by the fact that the President will be coming here in a month. And when he does, we'll be able to further many of these goals I've outlined here to you today. Thank you.
Senator Herb Kane from the Jerusalem Post. I was wondering, in your conversations with Israelis, did they discuss the Hagel nomination with you? Did
No.
they express concern about it? And what's your view?
Well, we have a process in the Senate to deal with confirmations. That process is ongoing, and I don't believe it's appropriate for me to travel abroad and make comments about our confirmation process. They're all on the record, but the issue did not come up. Yes, sir.
Hello, from the Times of Israel. I understand that you also visited Ramallah and Palestinian Authority. Can you tell us a little bit about your impressions over there in Ramallah, and whether you believe that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is a part of the reason that he's the party that the Israeli government should sit down?
Well, I didn't meet with President Abbas, but I did meet with Prime Minister Fayyad, and I was, let me just say, I was impressed by our meeting. I was impressed by the progress they've made with their security agencies. There's more to be done. He would admit that. And I think one of the things I've talked about in terms of the ultimate goal is a process that arrives at two states for two people living side by side peacefully. But that is a process, and it has to be a negotiated process, and one that requires certain conditions to be met. And one of the things that I've always been impressed with him about is his foresight on it, his belief and the idea that he has fostered that it is important to invest in and create institutions of both governance and civil society so that a Palestinian state becomes more possible or more viable. And we encourage them to continue to work on that. There's a very strong partnership with the United States. On security, there's a significant partnership with Israeli security forces. That needs to continue to grow and expand, and it's one of the hopes that we have with this presidential visit, President Obama's visit, that we'll continue to figure out ways to continue to build on the advances that they've made so that those conditions continue to be furthered and perhaps create a more viable environment for ultimately that final arrangement to be possible. Yes, ma'am.
Joe DiPietro from the New York Times. We all know that this process has been in a stalemate for a long time, and there's some hope that a lot of people are saying it should get restarted, and then maybe Obama's visit could help do that. What, after you've met with both sides, what do you think needs to happen to move forward in the process? What should Israel do? What should the Palestinians do to get out of this stalemate where the Palestinians say, we won't negotiate until there's a freeze, and the Israelis say, we won't negotiate with any preconditions? What would you suggest we actually each do to change that stalemate?
First of all, let me say that ultimately the final solution to this problem in terms of how it's arranged and how they ultimately arrive at that final agreement has to be negotiated between those parties. It cannot be imposed by the United States or by any international organism. And that's something that I believe is the only way it will work. What I think is clear is a couple of things. The greatest advancements in this process have always been made when Israel has felt secure. In essence, there is a direct relationship between Israel's security and the ability to make concessions and move forward in terms of arriving at a solution to this problem. And I think that's the first and foremost issue that I would raise. And that's there's strong bipartisan support for that principle, that the more secure Israel is, the likelier it's going to be that this issue can be solved. The second thing I would say is that we have to be careful not to raise expectations beyond what is immediately realistic, because expectations that are elevated and then unmet become counterproductive to the entire process. And that's something that was affirmed on both sides of the divide in our meetings in the last couple of days. That doesn't mean that no progress is made, that moves are not made forward. And I would just echo, and obviously we're interested to see what the President will say in his visit, but I would just say, and I would echo in many ways what we heard on both sides, that what is critical is that we know there are certain things that can be happening now to improve the conditions where a negotiated settlement on all of this becomes more possible. And that includes, for example, strengthening Palestinian governing entities in the West Bank, increasing their security capabilities, which have already made significant improvements, to continue to invest in those sorts of things. Allow the Palestinian economy in the West Bank to grow and become more vibrant. The more prosperous and the more secure the Palestinian people are, and the more secure the Israeli people are, the likelier that they will be able to sit down and negotiate a resolution to these vexing issues. But I do think it's a process, and I do think that it begins by creating these conditions where this sort of arrangement becomes more possible. Yes, sir.
Ed Sanders from the LA Times. Bipartisan U.S. policy for decades has been that Israel stop settlement activity. Do you support that policy?
Well, look, I think that the number one impediment to a negotiated settlement to all these issues is Israel's security. Now, an issue, when you talk about settlements, I would just say that that's an issue that will be, it's an important point that has to be negotiated and worked through, but not by the United States. In essence, the United States' position should not be to go in and dictate what the resolution of that issue should be. I think that's an issue that two parties working in good faith can work through and ultimately arrive at an arrangement that works for both sides. That's why, again, I repeat that the more secure Israel feels and the stronger the governing and security entities are on the Palestinian side for the Palestinian Authority, the easier, not easy, but the easier that sort of issue like the settlement issue becomes. But that's an issue that's going to have to be negotiated between those parties, not decided by the United States or by the European Union or by an international organism.
Separate from negotiations, I was just asking, do you you support the bipartisan U.S. policy, which has been in place for decades, that Israel is not?
What I support, no,
what is your view on the settlement?
My view is that that is an issue that needs to be negotiated between the sides and not imposed from the outside as to what the final resolution to it should be. My view is that if Israel feels secure and if the Palestinian Authority grows in its capacity to provide security for its own people, to grow its economy, to govern that territory, that those issues become easier. Will never be easy, but they'll become easier and more likely that they'll be solved. But I think that's the way that issue needs to be solved, is through a negotiation between both sides, not by third-party actors to come in and make determinations about what's right and what's wrong.
Last question.
What is it that you said that you think Israel needs to feel more secure in order to? So what should the Palestinians do to make Israel feel more secure right now?
Well, it's not just a Palestinian question on Israel's security. I mean, I think we need to be fair when we realize where Israel is today as opposed to where it was 5 years ago. It looks across the Sinai and sees instability. It looks to Jordan, and while it sees a willing partner on security issues, a country that is working through some political reforms that are important for its long-term viability. It looks to the north and sees a civil war in Syria with no clear outcome and weapons of chemical and biological agents and other weapons that are potentially could be dispersed to bad actors. It sees Iran with its nuclear ambitions. It sees Hezbollah in Lebanon. All of these issues contribute to Israeli insecurity, so we can't separate those from the question that you've asked me. Now, in terms on the Palestinian side, I would say a couple of things. The first is, I believe, and I think we've heard that in our meetings today, that if the Palestinian economy is vibrant and growing and providing prosperity and opportunity for the people and for the Palestinian people, if the security organizations for the Palestinian Authority continue to grow in capacity to do what they're supposed to do and what they've agreed to do and what they have been doing, and their capacity has increased, these are positive developments that I think contribute to Israeli sense of security that makes these other more difficult issues likelier to be solved. Take one last question.
Mitchell, CBN News, Senator. In your support in Syria, who would you support in Syria, and how would you keep that support from falling into the hands of Islamist forces that have infiltrated Syria? And what do you expect from and hope from President Obama's visit next month?
Well, I would say we had one meeting with, and I'm not, obviously it's the first time we meet, and we need to learn more about these folks, but we met with the former Prime Minister Hijab in Jordan, the former Syrian Prime Minister, and had a good conversation about the different actors that are involved in the Syrian conflict. I would say that I am hopeful that there are a number of forces within Syria that could potentially become serious interim governing bodies in a post-Assad Syria. I think we need to learn more about these folks. I think we need to continue to figure out ways that we become more engaged with them, and that's an ongoing process. I can't tell you today that we've identified an entity. I can tell you that advances have been made in that regard over the last 6 months, over the last 3 months, as the opposition has become not just more capable, but in some instances more unified. Now, there are other actors and other players in the Syrian conflict, like the al-Nusra Front, that clearly cannot be part of a future Syria if we hope to have peace in the region. And so I think our hope is to continue to try this process of identifying responsible actors that will be responsible not just in this conflict, but in the aftermath of this conflict, and empower them so that they will become the best organized, the best funded, the best armed, the best equipped, and the most capable post-Assad force on the ground in Syria. Our hope is to learn, for example, from the Libyan experience, where that didn't happen. We had all these dispersed militias to this day have not come under central control. As far as the President's visit, I think it's timely. I think it's a positive development. I hope that when the President comes, he will be able to make concrete suggestions about how to get this process going again with regards to conversations between the Israelis and the Palestinians on resolving those issues. And in particular, conversations about how both sides can work together to increase Palestinian security capacity, economic development, and educational empowerment in the West Bank, etc. Beyond that, I think obviously, I think what's most important about the President's visit is that he'll send a very clear signal that despite our many differences on many issues in the United States, there is a clear bipartisan support for a number of principles in foreign policy. Number one, that a nuclear Iran is not something we can live with. It's not just an Israeli problem, it's a problem for the world. Number two, that the security of Israel becomes first and foremost. And we believe that it is the security of Israel, not any other issue, which is the linchpin to solving many of these conflicts in the region, including, in particular, the Palestinian question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.